Welcome back to the Soky Sunrise. This morning I have been preparing some special election analysis, and we are now joined by Dr. Scott Lasley. He's a political scientist at Western Kentucky University, a professor there as well. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. I'm sure you were up late watching the election. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here bright and early.
So, first off, of course, there's a lot still up in the air with the presidential election. We'll let the national pundits take care of all that analysis. Let's focus on how Kentucky did in the election. Kentucky was called for President Trump relatively early in the night. Is that what we expected would happen?
Yeah, clearly, ever since 2000, Republicans have really dominated the presidential race and really national politics across the Commonwealth. And so, the fact that Donald Trump won easily here was expected. And I think, if you look at the other races, Senator McConnell perhaps won a little bit easier than people would have thought. Amy McGrath raised and spent $88 million between the primary and the general election. I think everybody expected Senator McConnell to win, but the margins were, I think, probably a little bit bigger. And the real big story across the state really is the state legislature, that it was a very good night for Republicans, not a very good night at all for Democrats. I think the final numbers might show Democrats lost 13 seats in the state house.
One thing that you mentioned I want to go back to is that McConnell McGrath race. As you said, it was not as close as many people thought it would be. McConnell had a pretty decisive win. Why is that? What happened?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is he was well positioned, I think, going into this election. The role of the Supreme Court, he was able to use to his advantage over the last 4 years. That if you go back to 2014, there was some concern from Republicans that he was vulnerable. If Matt Bevin challenged him in the primary early on in the race against Allison Lundergan Grimes, it was close. He ended up winning that by a fairly comfortable margin. But over the last 6 years, he didn't face a substantive Republican challenge in the primary. And then I do think that Kentucky trended a Republican at the end. That you saw that in the senator's race. I think that the late breakers, or the folks that weren't showing up in the polling, I think that the polls had them closer 10 to 12 points. Won by almost, I think, 20 at the end of the day. So this is just a really red state that probably went even redder than people maybe expected.
And I want to focus now on Warren County, which, for all intents and purposes, is a purple state in that very purple county in that very red state. We want to look at the Bowling Green City Commission race. It was a pretty intense campaign for a city commission race there. We've got somewhat final numbers. They still may change a little bit, but our top 4 vote getters as of right now are Dana Beasley Brown, Sue Perrigan, Carlos Bailey, and Melinda Hill, 2 more conservative-leaning and 2 more liberal-leaning candidates. Is that what we thought would happen?
Yeah, I think so. I think I think everybody thought Dana Beasley Brown would win again. She runs a very good race and has a broad base of popular support. Melinda and Sue have obviously fared fairly well in the past. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see, because this was a fairly bitter ideological race that you saw a lot of back and forth on social media. And so you're going to have a divided city commission that, looks like Todd Alcott will be mayor. And so it'll be right-leaning. But with Bailey and Dana Beasley Brown, certainly those are 2 strong more progressive voices on the city commission. So it'll be interesting to watch what
you mentioned Todd Alcott there, and I want to talk about that mayoral race as well that affects the city commission. He was the only person to get votes counted for him last night. That's because write-in votes for the mayor's race are not going to be counted until today. But Todd Alcott did get about 14,000 votes, and just looking at the map there, that may be insurmountable no matter how many of the write-in votes either the 2 write-in candidates get today. Would you agree with that? Does it look like Todd Alcott's probably going to be the mayor from that perspective?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's a pretty tall order for in any write-in election, and certainly in this case that I'm not sure exactly the total number of votes that were cast, but I'd be very surprised if there's enough to swing it, and they would all have to swing one way anyways. And so one would certainly presume that he will be the tie-breaking vote on more than one issue that faces the City Commission.
Well, Dr. Scott Lasley, thank you so much for your analysis this morning. Of course, there will be a lot of political analysis happening here on Soky Sunrise throughout the week, and of course, the national media as the presidential election is still up in the air. Stay tuned, everybody, here on Soky Sunrise. Hannah and the rest of the Soky Sunrise crew will have more after this quick commercial break.